The evening sun hung low in the sky, drenching the rolling hills of Ponyville's countryside in its light. The trees and grass all lay still and calm near the dirt path towards town. A small, cream-colored shape peeked over the horizon, bouncing along merrily. Little Apple Bloom's pink bow bobbed up and down as she trotted home, humming a tune and thinking about today's activities. She and the other Cutie Mark Crusaders had been taken to the park that day by Sweetie Belle's older sister Rarity, but now it was time for Apple Bloom to return home to Sweet Apple Acres. The tiny earth pony slowed as she neared a fork in the road. An old-looking signpost was stuck in the ground. She stopped to look at both signs adorning it. Ponyville, right. Everfree Forest, left, with a skull and crossbones next to it. Apple Bloom shrugged and turned in the direction of Ponyville. Before she could start trotting, the filly noticed another pony approaching from town. It was her friend, Twilight Sparkle. The purple unicorn wore a pair of saddlebags on her side, and she smiled as she approached Apple Bloom, standing there in the road.
Good evening, Apple Bloom. What's a little filly like you doing out here all alone?
Twilight asked the little earth pony.
Hi, Twilight.
Apple Bloom squeaked happily.
I was just on my way home. You wouldn't believe what happened at the park today. We were all hanging out, you see.
That's quite all right, Apple Bloom. I was just...
Twilight tried to interrupt Apple Bloom's story, but she wasn't fast enough.
And so Sweetie Belle thought we got lost.
Uh-huh.
So Scootaloo yells, Cutie Mark Crusader Park Rangers!
I'm sure that was very fun.
And she's all like, that's not what a bear sounds like, Apple Bloom.
Well, Apple Bloom, that all sounds very interesting, but I really need to get going.
Twilight stated bluntly as she turned to leave. Apple Bloom continued her story, even as she lost Twilight's attention.
Every last one, can you believe that?
Apple Bloom finished with a chuckle before she realized Twilight had walked away. She quickly trotted after her.
Hey, where are you going, Twilight?
I'm heading to Socorus to deliver some books on natural herbs in the area. But I need to hurry. I really don't want to be out after dark.
Twilight looked up as she trotted. The sun was just beginning to touch the treetops as it sank lower in the sky.
Ooh, can I come with you?
Apple Bloom asked excitedly, bounding with each step as she followed the unicorn. Twilight stopped at the request, turning to look at the filly.
I'm sorry, Apple Bloom, but the Everfree Forest is really no place for a little filly like you. It's dangerous.
Twilight said sternly. Apple Bloom frowned as she heard this.
But I'm not that small, and I could be super careful. Please, 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 please.
Apple Bloom hopped up and down in place as she bombarded her friend. Twilight shook her head despite the barrage.
Sorry, Apple Bloom, but I really don't think...
Before Twilight could finish, Apple Bloom plopped down on her haunches and inhaled deeply. Her eyes grew adorably wide as she let loose.
Please.
It's just too... There's just too many... All right. Enough. You can come with me.
Twilight shouted, trying to halt the filly's never-ending whine. Apple Bloom stopped immediately and hopped to her hooves, ready to go with a smile.
But you have to promise to stay right by my side the whole time.
I promise. Thank you, Twilight. Let's go.
Apple Bloom said cheerfully, staying right beside Twilight as the pair trotted towards the entrance to the Everfree Forest. The trees loomed over the two ponies as they approached. Shadows danced with the evening glow from the sun shining through the canopy. Apple Bloom marveled at the sight as she followed Twilight through a gap in the tree line. Every pony was always saying so many horrible things about the Everfree Forest, but Apple Bloom never let any of those stories scare her much. She had been here before, during the whole confusion between Sakura and her sister's friends, and she never felt like the forest was menacing or scary. Rather, she always felt it was a beautiful mystery, like a treasure chest awaiting a young heroine to open it and plumb its secrets. Twilight and Apple Bloom had traveled a ways before turning down a narrow branching path. Apple Bloom already knew the way to Socorus, but nonetheless let Twilight lead. The leaves of the trees rustled and swayed as a gust of wind blew by, stirring some of the creatures above. Apple Bloom couldn't take it all in fast enough, her eyes and head darting from one side to the other as she tried to see every detail. Chirping birds, small critters skittering between bushes, exotic flowers and plants she'd never seen before. The magic of discovery and adventure was everywhere in her little mind. Apple Bloom had become so enamored by the Everfree Forest that she hadn't noticed that they reached the final landmark before Zeccora's home. They were swiftly approaching a large field of blue flowers known as Poison Joke. Just one touch of these luscious lilies would afflict the unfortunate pony in question with a cruel magical prank. Twilight warned Apple Bloom not to touch them and to stay on the path between. Apple Bloom rolled her eyes at the unnecessary reminder. After passing through the joke, Zeccora's home was finally coming into view. A large, gnarled old tree that had been hollowed into a hut. It sat alone amidst a clearing in the trees. A small fire was blowing puffs of smoke out of her chimney. Tied up on many of the hut's branches were glass bottles of various shapes, sizes, and colors. Some contained mysterious liquids and potions, but most were empty. Along with the bottles, numerous wooden masks pockmarked Zeccora's yard. They were carved and painted in the fashion of Zeccora's homeland. To someone not in the know, the masks might have seemed menacing, but Apple Bloom knew they were only meant to welcome travelers. Twilight knocked a hoof on the door while Apple Bloom stood behind her, admiring one of the masks closest to the doorstep. She reached out a hoof to touch it, only to be stopped at the sound of a turning doorknob. The zebra enchantress only cracked the door at first, and then swung it wide after seeing her friend.
Hello and welcome, my pony friends. What brings you here so close to day's end?
Zeccora greeted the pair in her usual rhyming.
Hey there, Zeccora. I'm just here to drop off the books you wanted.
Twilight explained as her horn began to glow. Out of her saddlebags levitated 2 books, one with a green cover and the other blue. The books floated inside the hut and placed themselves on a table as Zeccora nodded and continued to smile.
Kind ponies, thank you for delivering what told.
Zeccora spoke softly. Twilight opened her mouth to reply, but was cut off suddenly by an immediate shift in Zeccora's demeanor.
But you should not stay for what will unfold.
The zebra looked down at Apple Bloom, her smile turning into a grim stare.
Hurry back to Ponyville you must. The darkness this night you cannot trust.
Zeccora had shut the door on them. Inside, they could hear locks being set.
Okay, that was weird.
Twilight said aloud, raising an eyebrow. She shrugged off her curiosity and turned, heading back into the forest. Apple Bloom hadn't moved from her spot on the stairs yet.
Apple Bloom, let's go!
What the hey did that mean, though? I ain't never seen Zeccora act like that. Something bad might be happening.
Apple Bloom said, unmoving.
I don't know. Zeccora probably just doesn't want us staying in the woods after dark. Come on.
Twilight urged the filly. Apple Bloom sighed and followed, staring at the ground in thought. A cool, insistent breeze had picked up after the two had left Zeccora's home. It blew gently through Apple Bloom's red mane and tail as the poison joke came into view. The little filly once again took to scanning the forest and taking in the sights. Apple Bloom stopped suddenly, swearing she had just seen something amongst the jokes staring at her. She paused for a long time, Twilight turning around and tapping hoof impatiently at the little pony.
Apple Bloom, it's getting dark. What in Celestia's name are you waiting for?
Twilight grumbled.
I thought I saw some pony, right out there.
Apple Bloom pointed a hoof toward the other side of the joke fields.
It was probably just a squirrel or a bird. Come on.
Twilight began trotting again, Apple Bloom following suit. She was forced to stop, though, as she collided with Twilight's rump, whinnying in frustration.
Now why are you stopping?
Apple Bloom asked, but needed no response. There, in front of the two ponies, lay a massive fallen tree. It was far too big to climb over, and it was so long it completely blocked what little path there was. Twilight was dumbstruck.
Now, how in the name of Equestria did this get here? It wasn't here when we came this way before.
Twilight wondered aloud. Apple Bloom glanced around the area nervously.
You don't think it was ghosts?
Apple Bloom asked, leaning down low and looking over the joke fields with a shiver.
Oh, Apple Bloom, don't be silly. There's no such thing as ghosts.
Twilight assured her, bracing herself as her horn began to glow a pale purple light. The fallen tree was enveloped in the glow, levitating into the air slowly. With a flick of her head, Twilight sent the large tree hurtling off into the forest with a loud crash. She stopped for a moment, breathing heavily.
That was was a lot harder than it seemed. Okay, Apple Bloom, let's keep...
No sooner had Twilight begun to trot again when she was forced to stop. Many more trees had been piled directly behind the first, larger one, and all blocked the path again. Twilight stomped the ground with a hoof, muttering under her breath. She glanced behind herself to see Apple Bloom just sitting there, waiting.
This is probably gonna take a while. Don't wander off, okay, Apple Bloom?
Twilight pleaded as she tried to compose herself for another run with the trees. Apple Bloom nodded and stood, then hopped as she was struck with an idea.
Hey, wait! Can't you just teleport around the trees rather than taking all the time to move them?
Apple Bloom asked.
Well, yes. I could just teleport both of us out of here. But then what will the next pony that needs to visit Sakura's do with all these trees blocking the path?
Twilight explained as she levitated a tree off the pile. Apple Bloom shrugged as Twilight continued.
I know it's getting late, but I just can't in good conscience leave the path blocked like this. There's joke all around this part of the trail, and I'd feel awful if some pony got pranked because I couldn't take the time to move a couple of logs.
Twilight seemed to be working herself into quite a guilt trip as she braced to move another tree trunk.
Okay, it's fine, Twilight. I'm sorry I didn't take all that into account.
Apple Bloom apologized.
And what about Sakura? With the path blocked like this, I'd be responsible for sealing her only way out of the forest.
Now, I bet Sakura has more than one way to get out of this here forest.
Maybe so, but I'm not willing to take that chance. I'd feel awful if I didn't do something to help, and this shouldn't take too long. Granted, I could go get help first, but it'll be dark by the time we get back, and I don't know how many ponies I'd be able to convince to come here after hours.
Alright, Twilight, alright. I'm just gonna go over here then and let you take care of them logs.
Apple Bloom removed herself from the conversation as Twilight continued to talk about all the ways the blocked path could cause trouble for travelers. She sighed with a light-hearted chuckle. Twilight was always concerned with every pony's well-being. It made Apple Bloom respect her all the more. Deciding she was perfectly content to mill about the path, Apple Bloom wandered back the way they came from Sakura's while looking at all the flowers. Apple Bloom's ears twitched as something giggled at her. She turned, spotting a face peering at her over the side of the poison joke. Apple Bloom said nothing, taking the chance to get a good look at the gray pony. She had a beautiful mane of blonde hair with golden streaks in her eyes. Something was strange about her eyes. They glowed in a gorgeous golden light. Apple Bloom took a step toward the pony, her hoof stopping just short of the joke. The glow from those eyes was dragging Apple Bloom in, both in body and, suddenly, soul. She felt her world begin to melt around her, with only the sight of those lucid orbs filling her entire vision. Darkness swirled and blended with the light, painting together a new world only Apple Bloom could see. A little gray filly coughed as she tripped, her chin smacking into the ground. She had been running so fast her golden blonde mane fell into her eyes, making her trip over a rock. A voice called out to her through the bushes.
Ready or not, here I come! I'm gonna find you!
The gray filly was off again, giggling as she ducked and weaved through the brush. She skidded to a halt as her trail rounded into a massive field of blue lilies. Forgetting her game, the little filly approached the flowers. She sniffed them, but was careful not to touch. They smelled sickly sweet, almost like a cupcake. Wandering down a ways, she managed to spot a thin pathway leading into the field. A crunching of twigs and branches caused her to turn around.
Finally caught you! Now you're it!
A different gray filly with a maroon-colored mane had emerged from the bushes, laughing and prancing about in victory. It took her a moment to realize their game had ended.
Hey, what are you looking at? Mita, come over here. I found a little path. It looks like it's big enough that we could walk through it. Oh no.
The red-haired filly waved both hooves disapprovingly.
You know the rules. We aren't supposed to go anywhere past the joke. We'll get into serious trouble if we do. Why aren't we allowed though? What's out there? The village leaders say the outside is filled with all sorts of mean ponies and nasty creatures. We are only able to live here because the flowers repel them. Come on, let's go back home.
Vertigo and nausea overtook Apple Bloom as she was peeled away from the vision. Just as she was regaining her composure, she saw the mystery pony duck her head behind the flowers, disappearing. Apple Bloom leaned forward, almost coming in contact with the joke. She stamped her hooves in frustration, wanting desperately to pursue her quarry. It was only as she turned to go did she see the entire joke field had parted to reveal a path just big enough for Apple Bloom to walk through. Apple Bloom hesitated at first, her curiosity starting to get the better of her.
Hey, Twilight!
Apple Bloom called out to her companion.
Not now, Apple Bloom.
Twilight yelled back as she started levitating another hefty tree away. Apple Bloom looked to the path again, then back to Twilight. With a deep breath, she stepped onto the path and crossed deeper into the woods. The Everfree Forest began to take on a much darker appearance once Apple Bloom had passed through the joke. The light from the setting sun had been blocked out by the thick canopy of this new area, and Apple Bloom could barely see 5 feet in front of her. She looked around this new thicket for her mystery pony.
Hello? Who are you?
No answer. Apple Bloom looked back the way she came, shocked to see the path had been enveloped by thorn bushes and briars. The only other way out now was through a new path she spotted to the south. Apple Bloom steeled her nerves and pressed on, the new trail bending and curving through the forest. The deeper Apple Bloom traveled, the darker the forest became. Soon, all the trees were shrouded in shadow, and only her path was left with increasingly sparse illumination. She paused again, listening.
Hello? Are you out there?
Still, no answer. Now Apple Bloom was getting worried. She contemplated turning back as she walked deeper, but something kept driving her forward. Apple Bloom's entire world was plunged into darkness as her path wound through another thick patch of underbrush. She could hardly see her own front hooves as she stumbled over some outreaching roots. Something to her side stirred, rustling the bushes. In a panic, she galloped forward, tripping over briars and branches. She yelped as she barreled through a particularly nasty patch of thorns, only to find herself barreling into a large clearing. Everything was dark, save for one spot. There, right in front of her, was a light on the edge of the forest. It was bright, so bright it illuminated the area around it. Apple Bloom ran forward, expecting an exit. She jumped through the light with glee.